You know, there comes a moment in life when you look in the mirror and realize you're not fighting the addiction anymore. The addiction is fighting to keep you small. And in that moment, something deep inside you wakes up. You remember who you were before the cravings, before the patterns, before the guilt. You remember that spark. Today, I want you to feel that fire again. Not someday, right now. Because the truth is, you are far more powerful than anything that has ever controlled you. And once you decide to reclaim your life, nothing, absolutely nothing, can stop you. When we talk about stopping any addiction and reclaiming your life, the very first breakthrough comes from understanding one simple truth. Nothing changes until you interrupt the pattern that's been running your behavior. Addiction isn't just about the substance or the habit. It's about the emotional loop you've conditioned yourself into, often without even realizing it. There's a trigger, a feeling, an urge, and then a behavior. And because you've run that loop so many times, your brain fires it automatically. You don't even choose it anymore. It chooses you. But the moment you interrupt that loop, physically, emotionally, mentally, you reclaim the power you thought you lost. Most people try to fight addiction by using willpower alone, but willpower is temporary. It gets tired. It fades. What actually works is shifting your state in the moment the urge arrives, because the urge is not the problem. The state you enter when the urge arrives is the problem. If you always feel stressed, bored, lonely, angry, or overwhelmed before you slip back into the addiction, then the addiction isn't the addiction. Your emotional state is. And if you learn to change your state, you change your decisions. Think about this. Every ritual you have around your addiction, where you go, what you touch, the time of day, the people involved, has been teaching your brain a predictable sequence. That's why a craving can show up even when you aren't thinking about it consciously. But you can break that sequence. You can interrupt that loop by getting up, moving your body, changing your breathing, changing your focus, changing your environment, even saying something powerfully out loud to shock your nervous system into a new mode. The moment you do this, you weaken the old pattern. And every time you weaken the old pattern, you strengthen a new possibility. Breaking a pattern doesn't require perfection. It requires interruption. The first time you disrupt the urge and choose something different, even if it's uncomfortable, it sends a message to your subconscious that says, I'm not controlled by this anymore. That message grows louder every time you act on it. And the more times you interrupt the pattern, the more cracks appear in the addiction's foundation. Eventually, the pattern collapses because your brain no longer gets the same payoff it used to expect. There's something powerful about disrupting the moment before the addiction takes hold. If you normally reach for your habit after work, change your ride home. If you normally isolate yourself before giving in, call someone before the feeling peaks. If you feel the urge rising in your chest, shift your body immediately. Jump up, walk fast, breathe deep, shock your system out of the trance. Your body is the fastest pathway to changing your emotional direction. When you move differently, you feel differently. And when you feel differently, you make different choices. You have to become aware of the moments that suck you in. Awareness is the first crack of light. Notice what your mind says. Notice what your body feels like. Notice the story that begins playing. It may say, just this once. It may say, you'll start over tomorrow. It may say, you deserve it. But the moment you recognize that voice is the voice of the pattern, not the voice of your identity, you break its power. Separation is freedom. What you can see, you can change. And I want you to get this. Interrupting the pattern isn't just about stopping the addiction. It's about reclaiming your authority over your nervous system. Once you realize you can shift your state at will, you stop being a victim of your impulses. You stop being a prisoner of your routines. You stop telling yourself the lie that you're weak or broken or destined to repeat the same behaviors. You recognize that you are capable of steering your mind, your emotions, and your actions in a new direction, not someday, but right now, in the very moment the urge appears. Every addiction in the world depends on your unconscious compliance. The moment you disrupt that compliance, you start writing a new story. And maybe at first you'll interrupt the pattern for 5 seconds, then 1 minute, then 5 minutes, then an hour, then a day. That gap between the urge and the action, this is where freedom begins. And as that gap grows, so does your strength. The pattern weakens because you stop feeding it. The craving loses its grip because you stop rewarding it. And your confidence rises because you start seeing that you do have the power to choose something better. You are not your urges. You are not your cravings. You are the one who notices them. And the one who notices them is the one who can control them. That's where your true power comes from. It's not about fighting harder. It's about interrupting smarter. It's about breaking the emotional loop that has been controlling your life and replacing it with a new rhythm that reflects who you truly are. The power to stop any addiction starts in the moment you decide to interrupt the pattern and reclaim your mind, your state, and your life. And it all begins the moment you say, this pattern ends now. When you try to stop an addiction, most people focus only on removing the habit. They try to cut it out, shut it down, push it away, and hope that by eliminating the behavior, they've solved the problem. But you and I both know it doesn't work like that, because addiction is never just the behavior. It's the emotional need underneath it. You didn't wake up one day and choose the addiction. It slowly became the quickest, easiest way for you to meet a need you didn't know how to meet any other way. And if you strip away the habit without replacing the need it fulfills, the mind will find another escape, another distraction, another crutch. The cycle continues. The faces change, but the pattern stays the same. Every behavior, no matter how destructive, serves an emotional purpose. Maybe it gives you certainty in a world that feels unpredictable. Maybe it gives you comfort when you feel alone. Maybe it gives you significance when you feel invisible. Maybe it gives you a sense of connection when you feel disconnected from yourself or others. Maybe it simply gives you relief, a moment where the noise stops, the pressure fades, and the world feels manageable for just a second. And when the need is strong enough, the mind will grab anything that gives relief, even if it destroys you in the long run. But here's the breakthrough. You can meet the same emotional needs in ways that empower you instead of drain you. You don't have to fight the addiction when you rise above it. You don't have to starve the need when you can satisfy it in a healthier, more powerful way. The moment you redirect the need toward something that builds you instead of breaking you, you begin to collapse the emotional architecture that kept the addiction alive. Think about it for years, maybe even decades. The addiction has been the fastest route to a particular feeling. That feeling might be calm, escape, stimulation, control, excitement, whatever it is, your brain has a shortcut toward it. If you want real change, you don't remove the shortcut. You create a better one because the mind will always choose the path that feels instantly rewarding. If you want to break the pattern, you have to make sure the alternative feels good enough to compete. The shift begins when you ask yourself, what need has this addiction been meeting for me? Not from a place of guilt or shame, but from curiosity. Because once you understand the need, you understand the leverage point. You understand the emotional engine driving the behavior. And when you know the engine, you can redirect it. Maybe what you needed was relief. So now you build new rituals that give you relief, breathing patterns that reset your body, movement that releases tension, conversations that lift you up, routines that calm your nervous system in seconds rather than destroying your self-respect. Maybe what you needed was connection. So instead of isolating, you create a network of people who genuinely care, who call you forward rather than pull you down. Maybe what you needed was significance. So you start pursuing goals that make you proud, that give you a real sense of accomplishment rather than a temporary hit of stimulation. Maybe what you needed was certainty. So you rebuild routines, structure, and habits that give you stability without self-destruction. This isn't about tricking yourself. It's about upgrading the emotional strategy that's been driving your life. When you give your mind a more powerful way to feel relief, connection, joy, certainty, or significance, the addiction stops being the primary option. It loses its attractiveness. It loses its grip. You weaken it not by fighting it, but by making it unnecessary. And here's another piece most people never realize. When you replace the old habit with a healthier alternative, your brain begins to rewire. It literally reshapes itself. Neural pathways that once fired automatically toward the addiction begin to die off when you stop using them. And the new pathways, the ones connected to the empowering behavior, grow stronger, faster, more dominant. Before long, you're not forcing yourself to choose the better path. It becomes natural. It becomes who you are. But you have to commit to the replacement, not just the removal. If you remove the habit and leave a void, the void will pull you back. Human beings don't do well with empty space. We fill it. So fill it deliberately. Fill it intelligently. Fill it with rituals that raise your energy instead of draining it. Fill it with practices that make you feel alive instead of numb. Fill it with people who elevate your sense of self instead of confirming your worst fears. Fill it with challenges that remind you of your strength and progress that proves your potential. You don't beat addiction by starving your needs. You beat addiction by feeding your needs in the right way. You reclaim your life not by cutting away a behavior, but by building a life so meaningful, so fulfilling, so aligned with who you really are that the addiction simply doesn't fit anymore. You outgrow it, you rise beyond it, you make it irrelevant. And it all begins with the decision to give yourself something better than the thing that's been breaking you. It begins when you say, I choose to meet my needs in a way that empowers my life. The moment you decide to stop any addiction, there is a deeper shift that has to happen, something far more powerful than willpower, more lasting than motivation, more transformational than discipline alone. You have to take back control of your identity. Because every behavior you repeat is ultimately a reflection of who you believe you are. And if you don't shift that identity, the old patterns will always find a way back in. You can fight the behavior for a few days, maybe a few weeks. But if you still see yourself as the person who needs the addiction will eventually win. Real change begins when you stop trying to change the behavior and start changing the story you've been living in. You have to understand how much of your life has been shaped by the identity you've accepted. When you say things like, I'm broken, I've always been like this, I have no control, I'm someone who struggles, your brain follows that script. It acts in accordance with the character you believe yourself to be. So even when you try to change, there's a part of you constantly pulling you back to the identity you've rehearsed for years. It's not sabotage, it's familiarity. Your mind doesn't cling to the addiction, it clings to the version of you that depended on it. But identity is not fixed, it's not destiny, it's a decision. You can rewrite it, you can reclaim it, you can restore power to the version of you that's been buried under anxiety, habits, and stories you never questioned. And the moment you decide who you really are, not who you've been conditioned to be, you create an internal shift so strong that the addiction loses its argument. It becomes something beneath you, something incompatible with the new standard you've set for your life. Most people think transformation starts with a new routine, a new strategy, a new habit. But real transformation starts with a new identity, a new I am, because the words that follow I am become the blueprint for your destiny. If you say, I'm someone trying to quit, the battle becomes exhausting. But if you say, I'm someone who chooses clarity, strength, and self-respect, your actions begin aligning with that identity almost automatically. You stop negotiating with your weakness. You stop entertaining the old patterns. You stop arguing with your cravings because the new version of you has nothing to do with them. Identity shapes behavior, but behavior also reinforces identity. Every time you choose strength over impulse, discipline over craving, awareness over autopilot, you're casting a vote for the identity you want to embody. Those votes add up, they compound, and eventually your brain stops identifying you with the addiction at all. It starts identifying you with the person who overcame it. It's important to realize that addiction thrives in identity confusion. When you don't know who you are, the addiction tells you. When you feel powerless, it becomes your sense of control. When you feel empty, it becomes your temporary fulfillment. When you feel lost, it becomes your false direction. But when you reclaim your identity, the addiction loses its purpose. It loses the permission you once unconsciously gave it. And this identity shift isn't about pretending. It's about remembering. There was a time before the addiction, a time before the habit, a time when you dreamed bigger, believed deeper, cared more fiercely. That version of you didn't disappear, just got buried under layers of pain patterns and survival strategies. But it's still there, it's still alive. And when you begin speaking to that version of yourself, when you begin feeding it, honoring it, choosing it, you revive the identity that addiction tried to silence. Sometimes the most powerful shift is simply declaring to yourself, I am not the person my addiction made me. Because you aren't. You are the one who survived it. You are the one who is rising out of it. You are the one rewriting the story. And understand this, the identity you choose becomes the environment inside your mind. When you choose an identity of strength, your thoughts begin reinforcing strength. When you choose an identity of clarity, your decisions begin reflecting clarity. When you choose an identity rooted in purpose, the chaos loses its influence. Addiction can't survive in an identity that contradicts it. When you shift your identity high enough, the addiction becomes too small, too weak, too incompatible with who you are becoming. This is why some people succeed and never go back. They didn't just quit the habit. They became someone who no longer needs it. They elevated their identity to a place where the old version of themselves simply doesn't fit into their new reality. They didn't just break free, they outgrew the cage. And you have that same power. You have the ability to declare who you are and live into that declaration every single day. You can step into the identity of someone who chooses growth over escape, purpose over comfort, alignment over addiction. Because the moment you reclaim your identity is the moment you reclaim your life. And it all begins the moment you say, this is who I am now. One of the biggest misconceptions about breaking addiction is the idea that you need one massive, dramatic breakthrough, one giant leap, one perfect moment of strength that fixes everything. But that's not how real transformation works. That's not how the human mind changes, and it's not how the nervous system rewires itself. Change happens through momentum, through small wins repeated consistently until the old pattern loses its grip and the new pattern becomes automatic. Most people underestimate the power of small wins because they're busy chasing the big victory. But the truth is, the small wins create the big victory. They're the stepping stones that lead you out of the mindset of struggle and into the mindset of progress. There's something extraordinary that happens when you give yourself permission to win in small, measurable ways. It shifts your psychology. It changes the tone of your inner voice. It builds self-respect. You go from, I can't do this, to I just did. From, I'm stuck, to I'm moving. From, I always fail, to I'm starting to stack wins. And when you stack enough wins, no matter how small, you create a force inside you that becomes unstoppable. Momentum is the antidote to self-doubt. Every tiny victory becomes a loud message to your brain. We're doing this. We're changing. Maybe your first win is just delaying the urge for 5 minutes. Maybe it's taking a walk instead of giving in. Maybe it's drinking water instead of reaching for the habit. Maybe it's a breath. Maybe it's a single moment of awareness. These may seem small, but they are monumental because they represent a shift in control. Every time you interrupt the old pattern and replace it with even a tiny action that supports your healing, you build a new identity. You reinforce the belief that you're capable of choosing differently. And the more often you choose differently, the easier it becomes. Addiction thrives in an environment where you feel powerless, overwhelmed, or defeated before you've even started. That's why momentum is so important. It doesn't give the addiction space to talk you out of your progress. It doesn't give your mind time to spiral into guilt or shame. You're constantly moving forward, even if the steps are small. And those small steps create a sense of certainty. Certainty that you are changing, that you can change, and that you will change. You have to understand something crucial the brain learns through repetition, not intensity. A single moment of resistance might feel heroic, but it won't rewire the circuits that have been firing the same pattern for years. What does rewire them is repeated interruption, repeated decisions, repeated small victories that begin to outnumber the old behaviors. Over time, your brain starts to prefer the new path. The cravings become weaker, the old triggers lose their power, and the new habits become familiar. This is how you shift from fighting addiction to outgrowing it. And don't underestimate the emotional power of momentum. When you start accumulating wins, you begin to trust yourself again. You start waking up with a little more strength. You start looking in the mirror with a little more respect. You start feeling a little more in control, a little more alive. That feeling is fuel. It gives you energy you didn't know you had. It gives you confidence that carries you through the harder days. And yes, there will be harder days, but momentum makes them survivable. It gives you something to stand on when the cravings try to pull you back. Even if you stumble, momentum is what gets you back up faster. It prevents a slip from becoming a spiral. When you've been stacking wins, a stumble doesn't erase your progress. It simply becomes part of the journey. You don't say, I failed. You say, I'm learning, I'm adjusting, I'm moving forward. That is the mindset that breaks addiction. That is the mindset that builds a new life. And here's the beautiful part. Momentum doesn't require perfection. It only requires direction. You don't need to conquer every temptation at once. You don't need to win every battle immediately. You just need to win one more moment than you lose, one more decision than you had yesterday, one more day where you choose clarity over chaos. That's how real change feels. It feels like movement, not mastery. When you honor your small wins, when you commit to stacking them day after day, you become someone who is not defined by their addiction, but by their progress. And that shift is everything. The more you win, the more you believe you can win. The more you believe you can win, the more you show up with power. And the more you show up with power, the more your old patterns crumble. Momentum is created in the smallest moments, and those moments are building the strongest version of you. It all begins when you say, today, I stack another win. Your environment shapes you far more than you realize. Every addiction in the world is strengthened by the surroundings that support it. Places, people, routines, objects, even smells, sounds, and times of day. The environment becomes part of the ritual. It becomes part of the identity. It becomes the stage where the addiction performs. And if you keep standing on the same stage, under the same lights, with the same props, acting out the same cues, the script will never change. You cannot create a new life while living in the old environment that built the addiction. At some point, you have to redesign the world around you to support the world within you. Most people try to break addiction with sheer willpower while everything in their environment is pulling them backward. They're fighting with one hand tied behind their back. They're trying to climb out of a hole while standing on the dirt that keeps collapsing beneath them. Changing your environment is not about running away. It's about removing the triggers that hijack your mind before you even notice. It's about making your path to strength easier than your path to destruction. It's about designing your life so that the best version of you has the advantage. You have to start by becoming brutally honest about the environments that keep your addiction alive. Is it a place in your home, a room, a corner, a drawer, a circle of friends, a certain drive you take, a routine you follow every day without thinking? Addiction hides in the predictable. It lives in the familiar. It thrives in repetition. So your job is to disrupt those familiar environments and replace them with spaces that support clarity, energy, and growth. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is rearranging your physical space, clearing out items that pull you back into the old version of yourself. Removing temptations is not weakness, it's intelligence, it's strategy. It's setting yourself up to win. If you know something triggers you, eliminate it. Don't argue with it. Don't negotiate with it. Make your environment louder than your excuses. When you walk into a space that's clean, open, organized, and free of the objects tied to your addiction, your nervous system settles. The chaos in your mind begins to quiet. The pull of the old patterns weakens because the cues are gone. Your environment also includes people. And this is where the transformation becomes even more real. Some relationships feed your strength and others feed your addiction. Some people push you to grow and others keep you at the level where your addiction felt normal. The people you surround yourself with either reinforce your identity or undermine it. They either expect more from you or expect nothing from you. And addictions thrive in environments where expectations are low. You don't need to cut everyone out of your life, but you do need to elevate the standard of people you allow close to you. You need people who remind you of who you're becoming, not who you were. People who encourage your progress instead of enabling your weakness. People who hold you accountable, who see your potential, who challenge you to rise instead of shrink. Even one powerful relationship can outweigh 10 destructive ones because support doesn't come from numbers, it comes from alignment. And just as important as removing triggers and elevating your relationships is creating environments that make your new identity convenient and natural. If you want clarity, build a space that inspires clarity. If you want strength, surround yourself with tools that build strength, a journal, a meditation space, a place to move your body, reminders of your purpose, reminders of your standards. Build a home that feels like a sanctuary, not a battlefield. Build a routine that feels like momentum, not survival. You have to design your environment with the same intention you're using to design your future. Because the environment you wake up and walk in, sit in, and think in is shaping your future every second, even when you're not aware of it. The world around you is always influencing the world inside you. So instead of letting the environment control you, create an environment that carries you toward the version of yourself you're becoming. And here's the truth, when your environment supports your growth, everything becomes easier. Your cravings weaken because the cues are gone. Your discipline strengthens because your surroundings align with your goals. Your identity shifts faster because your environment reflects the person you're deciding to become. When the world around you is designed for your success, relapse becomes less likely and progress becomes more natural. You are not just breaking an addiction, you are rebuilding a life. And a life is built not only through decisions, but through the environment that makes those decisions easier to maintain. When you transform your space, you transform your state. When you change your environment, you change your destiny. And it all begins the moment you say, I design my environment to support my freedom. There comes a moment in every journey of breaking addiction where you realize something profound. You can't shame yourself into freedom. You can't punish yourself into growth. You can't hate yourself into healing. For years, maybe even your whole life, you've carried around this belief that beating yourself up will somehow make you stronger, that guilt will keep you in line, that self-punishment will force you to change. But all it ever did was tighten the chains. Shame doesn't liberate you. Shame feeds the addiction, because the more ashamed you feel, the more you search for escape. And where do you escape? Back into the very thing you're trying to leave behind. The real shift, the one that actually breaks addiction at its core, happens when you stop attacking yourself and start aligning yourself with a purpose that's bigger than the craving, bigger than the moment, bigger than the pain. Purpose pulls you forward. Shame pulls you down. When you begin to live with a purpose, the addiction loses its importance. It loses its argument. It loses its grip because it can't compete with a life that actually means something. Think about it. Every time you've fallen back into the habit, every time you gave in, it wasn't because you were weak. It was because you were empty. And humans don't do well with emptiness. We fill it. If you don't fill your life with meaning, the addiction will fill it for you. If you don't fill your mind with direction, old patterns will take over. If you don't fill your heart with purpose, cravings will step into the void. So the mission becomes this: fill your life with something so powerful, so compelling, so deeply aligned with who you want to become that the addiction simply doesn't fit anymore. Purpose gives you a reason to get up when you're tired. It gives you a reason to stay strong when you feel vulnerable. It gives you a reason to push through the moments when the craving feels louder than your logic. Purpose becomes the emotional anchor that keeps you grounded in who you're becoming, not who you were. When you're connected to something meaningful, your family, your health, your future, your growth, your impact, you stop making decisions from impulse and start making them from intention. But purpose doesn't just appear out of nowhere. You create it, you choose it, you build it. And often purpose is born from the very pain you're trying to escape. Sometimes your purpose is simply this: I refuse to live in the darkness anymore. Sometimes it's, I want to be an example of strength for the people I love. Sometimes it's, I want to become the person I know I am capable of being. Purpose doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be honest. It has to be yours. And here's the beautiful part. Once you begin living with purpose, even in small ways, you start feeling something you may not have felt in a long time: pride. Not the superficial kind, not ego-driven pride, but the kind that comes from knowing you showed up for yourself today, that you honored your future, that you made one decision that aligned with the life you want. That pride builds self-worth, and self-worth is the opposite of addiction. Addiction grows where self-worth is starving. When self-worth rises, addiction loses nourishment. As you step deeper into your purpose, the things that once tempted you start feeling out of place. They don't match your new identity. They don't match your new standards. They don't match the life you're building. You begin to see clearly that the thing you once ran to for relief was actually stealing your strength, stealing your clarity, stealing your future. And when you see that, truly see it, a new power rises inside you, a power that says, I'm done sacrificing my life for a moment of escape. Purpose turns your journey from a fight into a mission. You're no longer battling cravings. You're pursuing a vision. You're no longer resisting temptation. You're rising into a future that inspires you. You're no longer running from pain. You're running toward possibility. And in that shift, you stop being someone trying to quit, and you become someone who is becoming. Someone who is growing, someone who is choosing life over numbness every single day. You break addiction not by fighting harder, but by living fuller, not by punishing yourself, but by valuing yourself, not by drowning in shame, but by choosing a direction that fills you with meaning. That choice made again and again becomes your strength. It becomes your identity. It becomes the fuel that keeps you moving forward. And it all begins the moment you say, my purpose is stronger than my addiction.